Why was Amelia Harper the only person willing to climb that frozen hill when Wyatt Callahan's own neighbors stayed away? Dela's screams tore through the snow as Amelia shoved open the cabin door. Wyatt lay beside the cold hearth, his breath catching in frightening pauses. She dropped to her knees, felt the heat in his forehead, then looked toward the frantic barn. "Don't worry about your ranch. I'll take care of everything." But what had she just stepped into? "Stay with us." Wyatt Callahan dropped the hammer twice before he admitted his hand was shaking. The third time, it disappeared into the snow beside the north fence. He stared at it for a moment, breathing through his mouth. December wind swept across the Callahan spread and drove loose snow against his boots. Beyond the fence, the Montana mountains had vanished behind a wall of gray. Wyatt coughed into his glove. The pain went deep this time. He bent over the fence rail until it passed. "Just a cold," he muttered. There were still 2 calves to check before dark. At 41, Wyatt had spent most of his life believing a man finished what needed doing. Fever did not mend fences. Coughing did not feed cattle. And nobody was coming up that hill to do either job for him. That last part had been true for 6 years. Since Eleanor died, Wyatt had arranged his life that way. He reached for the hammer, his knees folded. For several seconds he remained in the snow, one hand gripping the fence post. When he tried to stand, the pasture tilted beneath him. This time fear entered his eyes. Not for himself, for the animals. "Get up." He forced himself upright. The cabin stood perhaps 300 yards away. Wyatt remembered crossing half that distance. He remembered Dela calling from the barn. He remembered getting one hand around the cabin latch. After that, nothing. Hours later, Dela was still screaming. Her cries carried down the frost-covered hill and across Creek Road, sharp enough to make Amelia Harper pull her mare to a stop. She sat listening. Another cry came from the Callahan barn. Amelia knew the place. Everybody in Silver Creek did. Wyatt Callahan owned 430 acres above the creek, good cattle land, and one of the best horse barns in the valley. He also had a reputation for wanting exactly what he'd had since his wife died, to be left alone. Amelia almost respected that wish. Then Dela screamed again. "No," Amelia whispered. She turned uphill. Snow reached the mare's fetlocks in places. At the barn, Amelia dismounted and immediately saw something was wrong. Feed bins untouched, water buckets nearly empty. Cutter, the big roan gelding, paced his stall, and Dela kept looking toward the cabin. "All right, girl, I hear you." Amelia crossed the yard. She knocked once. No answer. Twice. Nothing. She opened the door. Wyatt lay beside the cold hearth. For one terrible instant, Amelia thought she was too late. Then his chest moved. Barely. She dropped beside him, pulled off one glove, and pressed her palm against his forehead. He was burning. "Mr. Callahan?" His eyelids moved but did not open. His breathing caught, stopped long enough to frighten her, then came again in a shallow rasp. Amelia looked around the silent cabin. No fire, no food prepared. Wet snow melting from Wyatt's coat onto the floorboards. Nobody else was coming. She knew that kind of silence. 2 winters earlier, she'd heard neighbors explain why they hadn't visited while her mother Margaret was failing. Didn't want to intrude. Thought the family wanted privacy. Didn't seem like our place. Those words had sounded very reasonable right up until there was a coffin in the ground. Amelia had made herself a promise afterward. She would never use politeness as an excuse for walking away from somebody who needed help. She leaned closer to Wyatt. "Don't worry about your ranch, Mr. Callahan." His eyes opened a fraction. "I'll take care of everything." Then she stood. The fire came first. She hauled split pine from the stack, coaxed flame into the neglected hearth, then got Wyatt out of his wet coat and onto blankets near the heat. She cooled his forehead, put water within reach, and set broth simmering in a blackened pot. Then she went outside. Dela quieted when Amelia entered the barn. "I know," Amelia murmured, rubbing the mare's neck. "You did your part." She fed Dela and Cutter, broke ice, carried water until her shoulders burned, checked the cattle. The smaller calf was weak but standing. Amelia watched him nurse before moving on. By night, snow had covered her tracks between cabin and barn. She kept making new ones. Sometime after midnight, Wyatt opened his eyes and found a woman he barely recognized sitting beside his fire. "Who?" Amelia looked up. "Amelia Harper." The name brought a broken memory. Patterson's store. Women laughing. Amelia standing straight while they did it. Wyatt walking past. He had said nothing. The fever pulled him under again. Morning brought the smell of broth. Wyatt woke in his chair and tried to stand. A firm hand caught his shoulder. "Don't. My horses. Fed. Cattle. Checked. The little calf. Still weak. But he ate." Wyatt looked toward the window. "Wood?" "Beside the door." He slowly turned back to her. Everything he'd nearly killed himself trying to carry had somehow been carried. "Why?" Amelia frowned. "Why'd you come in?" She glanced toward the barn. "Your mare was crying. That was all. No speech about kindness, no request for gratitude. His horse had cried, and Amelia Harper had listened. When she finally put on her coat, she stopped at the door. "You'll probably be angry when the fever's gone. Embarrassed, too. You may tell me not to come back." Wyatt watched her. "I'll come anyway until you're fit to handle this place yourself." She opened the door. "Miss Harper." Amelia paused. "Thank you." A beat passed. "For the horses." Something softened in her eyes. "You're welcome, Mr. Callahan." The door closed. Wyatt listened until the hoofbeats disappeared. For 6 years, silence had been the one thing he'd trusted. That morning, it felt different. Empty. Before sunrise the following day, Dela made a low, pleased sound from the barn. Wyatt opened his eyes. Through the frost on the window, a lantern was moving slowly up the hill. Amelia Harper had come back. Wyatt watched until she reached the barn. Dela greeted her with that same low sound. Something about it bothered him. His own horse seemed to have accepted Amelia's place on the ranch before he had. By the time she entered the cabin, snow dusted the shoulders of her dark wool coat. "You're awake." "Been awake." Amelia glanced at the untouched cup beside him. "You're a poor liar, Wyatt Callahan." He noticed she still called him Mr. Callahan whenever she was serious, but apparently fever had earned him exceptions. That morning became another, then another. Amelia arrived before daylight, usually carrying something wrapped in cloth from the Harper kitchen. She checked the stock first, always. Only afterward did she come inside to see whether Wyatt had obeyed instructions. Usually he had not. On the 5th morning, she found him in the barn, wrapped in a blanket. "Back inside." "I'm only watching." "You're staring." "Watching." Amelia folded her arms. "What's the difference?" "Staring's rude. Watching's paying attention." For half a second, she looked ready to argue. Then she smiled. Wyatt forgot what he'd been watching. As his strength returned, he began noticing things about Amelia that had nothing to do with his illness. She caught the uneven wear on Dela's left front shoe before he did. She found a hairline crack in the west trough. She made him restack hay she'd declared unsafe. Then one morning, he discovered her beside the weak calf with rope, a wooden platform, and an old balance beam. "What are you building?" "A scale." "You built a livestock scale?" "I need to know if he's gaining." She said it as if no other answer made sense. Wyatt watched her work, not to impress him, not to prove anything, because an animal needed tending, and Amelia wanted facts instead of guesses. "He's up nearly 7 pounds, she announced. Wyatt looked at the calf, then at her. "You're good at this." Amelia wiped her hands on her skirt. "I know." That answer stayed with him. On the 8th morning, Amelia entered the cabin and stopped. 2 plates sat on the table. Eggs, biscuits, coffee. Wyatt nodded toward the second chair. "Sit down, Miss Harper. You cooked? I survived 41 years. Your biscuits may not have. They're Eleanor's recipe." The teasing disappeared from Amelia's face. She sat. For years, breakfast had been the quietest part of Wyatt's day. That morning he heard a fork touch china, firewood settling in the stove, Dela shifting beyond the wall, someone else's breathing. The cabin did not feel invaded. It felt occupied. Later, Amelia told him Margaret Harper had taught her most of what she knew about animals. She had once hoped to apprentice with an animal doctor in Billings. "What happened?" "He looked at me and decided I wasn't what he wanted." Wyatt waited. Amelia offered nothing more. He was wrong. She met his eyes. "I know." Again, Wyatt felt that strange pull. She wasn't waiting for him to give her worth. She simply wanted the world to stop pretending it couldn't see what was already there. A few mornings later, he said her name without thinking. "Amelia." She stopped beside Dela. Wyatt cleared his throat. "If you're willing." Her expression softened. "All right." That afternoon, she handed him a hoof pick. "Wyatt." Neither mentioned the change. Silver Creek did. When Wyatt finally rode into town, Patterson's general store smelled of coffee beans, lamp oil, and damp wool. Before reaching the porch, he heard Hattie Dobbins talking. Amelia was supposedly making herself indispensable because she had no other way to catch a prosperous widower. Someone laughed. Wyatt stopped. He remembered another day outside this same store, Amelia standing alone, laughter behind her, and himself walking away because he had not been the one doing the hurting. For the first time, that excuse looked exactly as small as it was. He stepped inside. Ted Patterson went quiet. "So that's what's being said?" Ted shifted behind the counter. "Folks talk, Wyatt. Then folks can hear this." Every face turned. "Amelia Harper came up my road when I was too sick to stand. She fed my horses, checked my cattle, carried water, and kept a calf alive. She asked me for nothing." Nobody spoke. Anyone saying different is lying about a woman they don't know. Wyatt set his order on the counter. 20 pounds flour, 10 pounds oats. Ted reached for his pencil. Wyatt added calmly, "Amelia's been using more flour than I expected." Her name landed deliberately in the silence. That evening, Amelia was kneeling beside the recovering calf when Wyatt joined her. Their shoulders almost touched. "What are you telling him?" "That he's going to be all right." "Is he?" She ran one careful hand along the calf's side. "I think so." Wyatt watched her. "I like things that need tending," Amelia said quietly. This time, when she looked at him, neither looked away quickly enough. 3 mornings later, she was late. 10 minutes. Then 20. At 30, Wyatt's coffee had gone cold. Dela began calling. Wyatt stood in the barn doorway, staring down the white road. Finally, a rider appeared around the bend. Amelia. Relief crossed his face before he could hide it. And standing there with cold coffee waiting inside, and Dela calling beside him, Wyatt understood something he did not particularly want to understand. He wasn't simply grateful that Amelia Harper kept coming. He had started expecting her. And somewhere between expecting a person and listening for them before dawn lay the dangerous beginning of needing them. Wyatt disliked the realization enough to spend several days pretending it had never occurred. Then Tom Briggs rode onto the Callahan place. Wyatt was returning from the north fence when he heard Tom's voice beside the barn. "Callahan's done well for himself. Somebody keeping the ranch running while he recovers. Convenient arrangement." Amelia stood near the open stall door, a feed measure in one hand. Tom smiled beneath his hat brim, though I'd have expected him to choose something a little more conventional. Amelia's face became still, too still. Wyatt had learned enough about her to know that was when words had found their mark. Tom. Briggs turned. His smile changed immediately. Wyatt, good to see you upright. Wyatt crossed the frozen yard and stopped beside Amelia. Don't speak about Miss Harper that way again. Tom lifted both hands. Didn't mean anything by it. I heard what you meant. The wind moved loose snow across the yard. Tom's smile thinned. I came about the east pasture. Thought your illness might have changed your position. It hasn't. Wyatt stepped closer to Amelia until only inches separated their sleeves. And neither has my position on how people are treated on my land. Tom looked between them, touched 2 fingers to his hat, and mounted. After he disappeared down the road, Amelia said, He's not going to be the last. Wyatt said nothing. My being here is making things harder for you. No, it is. She set the feed measure down. I need you to understand something. I didn't come here because I thought you'd owe me. Not money, not your name, not anything. Amelia, I came because Dela was crying and you needed help. Look at me. She did. I know why you came. Her eyes searched his. How? Because I've watched you. She went quiet. Not when you knew I was watching, when you thought nobody was. Something in her face loosened. I know who you are. 4 days before Christmas, Robert Harper came riding up the hill. Amelia saw her father and stopped dead. Papa. 3 weeks, Robert said. You've spent 3 weeks coming here every day. He was sick. He's a widower. You're unmarried. The whole valley is talking. I know. Get your things. Amelia did not move. Wyatt came from the cabin. Robert looked toward him. Mr. Callahan, Mr. Harper, I'd like a word. Inside, Robert remained standing until Wyatt gestured toward the table. My daughter has a reputation to consider. She also has work here worth respecting. And your intentions. Wyatt could have offered a comforting lie. Instead, he looked Robert Harper directly in the eye. I'm still working that out. Robert's jaw tightened. But I'll tell you what I do know. Amelia's done legitimate work here. Work most hired men couldn't have done better. I'll compensate her properly. And nobody has cause to be ashamed of her being on this ranch. When Robert rode away, Amelia found Wyatt in the barn. What did you tell him? The truth. About your intentions. Wyatt hesitated. That I'm still working them out. Her eyes lowered. Then she nodded. That's honest. Christmas Eve came bitter and clear. Amelia arrived carrying biscuits, ham, and apple cake. Wyatt was at the kitchen table with several pages spread before him. A letter? Eleanor's sister, Martha Aldrich. Amelia looked at him. I haven't answered her in 3 years. She sat across from him. I don't know how to start. Start with something true. So Wyatt wrote about December. Later, with supper between them and firelight moving across the cabin walls, Amelia asked about Eleanor. Wyatt told her about the garden along the south wall, the stones Eleanor had set herself, her laugh. She would have liked you, he said. Amelia's eyes lifted. I think I would have liked her. The silence afterward was different. Wyatt, what are we doing? He drew breath. Bang, bang, bang. 3 men stood outside. Frank Dobbins was in front. We've come about the situation here. What situation? An unmarried woman alone in a widower's house after dark. Folks are concerned. Wyatt stared at him. How many mornings did you ride up here when I was dying? Frank blinked. What? How many? No answer. Wyatt looked at the other men. She came. His voice remained low. She carried water through snow, fed my stock, kept my cattle alive while I couldn't cross this room without holding onto furniture. Frank shifted. You weren't concerned then. You became concerned when she sat at my supper table. Nobody spoke. Miss Harper will leave when she chooses. She'll come back when she chooses. And what Silver Creek thinks about it is no longer my concern. Wyatt closed the door. Not hard, just final. When he turned, Amelia was standing beside the table. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't what? Don't tell me something tonight because you're angry, or grateful, or lonely." He stopped. "I can survive what Hattie thinks, or Tom Briggs. But if I let myself believe you see me differently," her voice failed, "and someday you realize you don't." Wyatt understood. "I know what it costs to believe something again." Her eyes met his. "Yes," she said, "you do." He walked her to her horse an hour later. "Come back after Christmas." She gathered the reins. "Why?" "Because there's something I want to say when it isn't Christmas Eve." "All right." Wyatt watched her disappear into the darkness. Then he returned inside. 2 plates. Martha's letter waiting to be mailed. The cloth Amelia had forgotten beside her basket. The old silence came down around him. And suddenly, Wyatt understood what he had done. Waited. Again. He grabbed his coat. 10 minutes later, his horse was running down the frozen Harper Road. At 10 o'clock, Robert Harper's opened his front door and found Wyatt Callahan standing there with frost on his shoulders. "I need to speak to Amelia." A moment later, she appeared behind her father. Her face went pale with worry. "Wyatt, is it Dela?" He shook his head. "No." He looked directly at her. "It's me." Amelia stepped onto the porch and pulled the door nearly closed behind her. Warm lamplight narrowed to a golden line along the frame. Wyatt removed his hat. "I told you I had something to say after Christmas. You also said you'd wait." "I changed my mind about waiting." She studied him. Snow clung to his coat. His horse stood steaming at the hitch rail. He had ridden 2 miles through darkness for this, whatever this was. Wyatt swallowed. "I saw you once before you came to my ranch. At Patterson's. People were laughing." Amelia's expression changed. "I remember. I walked away. Yes, I told myself I hadn't done anything wrong because I wasn't the one laughing." His fingers tightened around his hat. "I was wrong." Amelia said nothing. "I don't know exactly what this is yet," Wyatt continued. "And I'm not going to promise you a future tonight just because I'm afraid of losing something." That hurt. He saw it. Then he finished. "But I know I want to find out." Her eyes lifted. "When you rode away tonight, I went back into that cabin, and the silence felt like the 6 years before you came. That frightened me more than this does. This. Caring whether you come back." For several seconds, there was only wind moving beneath the porch roof. Then Amelia said, "Come back after Christmas." "Amelia, in daylight, after you've slept. When Frank Dobbins isn't in your head, and Eleanor isn't sitting between every word." Wyatt looked at her. "And if I still mean it? Then I'll believe you're ready to talk." December 26th came cold and bright. Wyatt reached the Harper place before 7. Amelia was waiting beside the fence. "You came early." "I said I'd come." "I know." Something in her voice made him stop. "You thought I wouldn't." "I thought daylight might change things." It didn't. He stepped down from the saddle. "Ask me anything." Amelia's gloved hands tightened around the fence rail. "Anything?" "Anything." She looked across the snow instead of at him, then quietly, "Do you see me?" Wyatt didn't answer too quickly. She turned toward him. "Not what I did for your ranch. Not what I can carry. Not the animals I can mend. Me." Her voice remained steady, but he could hear what steadiness was costing her. "I've had people value me because I was useful. Sometimes usefulness was the only reason they made room for me." She drew one breath. "I need to know whether you understand the difference." Wyatt remembered the morning after his fever broke. You fell asleep beside my fire. Amelia blinked. You'd been awake most of the night. Your boots were covered in mud. There was hay caught in your hair. Her gaze dropped. I woke before you did. Watched you for maybe 2 minutes. What did you think? That you were beautiful. She looked up. Wyatt didn't soften the word or dress it in explanation. Not because you'd saved me. I looked at you and realized I'd spent too much of my life deciding what things were before I bothered seeing them properly. He stepped closer. You asked what I see. A pause. You, Amelia. Her breath left slowly. I believe you. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was enough to begin. 3 days later, a letter arrived at the Callahan Ranch. Silver Creek Community Association. 7 signatures. Frank Dobbins, Bill Mercer, Curtis Hale. The letter requested that Wyatt clarify his intentions toward the Harper woman, or end an arrangement supposedly troubling the community. Wyatt read it twice, folded it, put on his coat. The association used Patterson's back room for meetings. 4 signers were there when Wyatt entered. Frank stood. Callahan, sit down. Something in Wyatt's voice made him do it. Wyatt laid the letter on the table. Before Amelia ever came to my ranch, I watched people make sport of her in this very store. Nobody moved. I did nothing. Frank frowned. I decided silence made me innocent. Wyatt shook his head. It didn't. Then he looked around the table. This letter isn't about decency. If it were, somebody would have climbed that hill when my horses screamed. Curtis looked down. You're uncomfortable because Amelia Harper refused to remain what you'd already decided she was. Frank's chair scraped. Now hold on. No. The room went still. She is one of the finest people I've encountered in my entire life. Wyatt tapped the folded letter. If you're asking whether I intend to keep seeing her, yes. He looked directly at Frank. If you're asking whether you get a vote, no. He walked out. By evening, Amelia already knew. Silver Creek carried news faster than winter wind. You didn't have to fight my battles, she told him at the kitchen table. That wasn't your battle. They wrote about me. They wrote to me. Wyatt reached across the table and covered her hand. Amelia stared at his scarred fingers. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. So, do what? Have somebody make room for me without expecting me to earn every inch of it. His thumb moved once across her knuckles. You don't have to know how yet. Slowly, Amelia turned her hand beneath his. Their palms met. 4 days into January, Thomas Harper rode onto the ranch. Wyatt saw Amelia's eldest brother approaching and expected trouble. Instead, Thomas dismounted and stood awkwardly beside his horse. Our father talked to us. Wyatt waited. We didn't know about Billings, the apprenticeship. We didn't know how often she'd been treated like... He stopped. We didn't know because we never asked. Thomas looked toward the barn. She got so good at carrying things alone, I think we decided that meant she wanted to. Wyatt's anger disappeared. She's inside, Thomas nodded. The barn door closed behind him. Wyatt stayed outside. 20 minutes later, Thomas emerged with reddened eyes. He held out his hand. Thank you for seeing her. Wyatt took it. Wasn't hard. Just had to look. After Thomas rode away, Amelia appeared. Her eyes showed she'd been crying. Wyatt didn't ask what had been said. He simply walked toward her. I'm looking. I know. I'm not going to stop. Amelia stared at him. Then she lifted one hand and placed it against his weathered cheek. Wyatt went completely still. Good, she whispered. The following Sunday, Robert Harper invited Wyatt to dinner. Afterward, the older man took him aside. Margaret used to say Amelia would carry more than anybody and get less credit for it. Robert looked toward the kitchen. His daughter was laughing with one of her nieces. Her mother told me not to let that swallow her. His voice roughened. I stopped paying attention. Wyatt listened to Amelia laugh beyond the door, and in that quiet room he made himself a promise he did not speak aloud. If Amelia chose a life beside him, she would never have to earn her place by carrying everything alone again. Late January gave him the chance to prove he meant it. A cow went into labor after sundown. By 9, Wyatt knew something was wrong. Amelia arrived with her medical kit, stripped off her coat, rolled her sleeves, and knelt in the straw. The calves turned. For nearly 2 hours they worked beneath a crooked lantern. Wyatt supplied strength when Amelia asked for it. Amelia supplied patience when Wyatt's instinct was to force what could not be forced. Steam rose from the cow's body into the freezing barn air. Finally, the calf came. It lay still. Amelia cleared its mouth while Wyatt rubbed its sides. Come on. A second passed. Then another. The calf coughed. Amelia froze. A tiny breath came. Then another. The newborn lifted its head. Wyatt sat back in the straw and laughed. Amelia stared at him. What? I've never heard you laugh. He looked at the calf struggling toward its mother. 6 years on this ranch, and apparently it took you and the most stubborn calf in Montana to manage it. She smiled. Wyatt's laughter faded, but something warmer remained. He looked at her muddy skirt, her loose hair, the hands that had once pressed broth into his because he was too sick to argue properly. Marry me, Amelia blinked. You're proposing in a barn. I'm proposing where I figured out I wanted to. Her smile disappeared. Not from displeasure, from the sudden weight of what he had said. Wyatt took her hand. This is where you belong, Amelia, if you want it to be. Her eyes filled. I've spent my whole life waiting for someone to say I belonged somewhere. You don't have to earn your place here. She looked around the barn she had kept alive during his fever, then back at him. Yes. Wyatt brought her dirty hand to his lips. Behind them, the calf found its feet. Days later, a letter arrived from Missoula. Martha Aldrich. Wyatt opened it at the kitchen table. He expected family news. Instead, Eleanor reached across 6 years. Martha wrote that during Eleanor's final months, her sister's greatest fear had not been death. It had been Wyatt afterward. Eleanor had known he would shut every door, call loneliness strength, and convince himself needing nobody was the same thing as surviving. She had asked Martha to tell him something if the opportunity ever came. Love again. Not instead of her, because of what loving her had taught him. Wyatt read that passage twice. When Amelia arrived, she found him sitting motionless with the paper beneath his hand. She read it. For a long while, neither spoke. Finally, Amelia said, "She knew you. Better than I knew myself." He looked toward Eleanor's stone-bordered garden, buried beneath snow. "Martha's coming in February." Amelia folded the letter carefully. "I'd like you to meet her." "I'd like that." Martha Aldrich arrived on the second Thursday of February. She studied Wyatt first, then Amelia. "So you're the woman who found him on the floor?" "Yes, ma'am." "And kept coming back?" "Yes, ma'am." Martha took both Amelia's hands. He needed somebody who wasn't afraid of him. Amelia glanced toward Wyatt. "He isn't frightening. Most people think he is. Most people aren't paying attention." Martha laughed. Wyatt hadn't expected that sound to hurt. It did, but gently, like remembering sunlight rather than losing it. They married in March. The ceremony took 12 minutes in the Callahan cabin. Robert Harper came. Thomas and the rest of Amelia's family came. Gus stood near the back in his cleanest shirt. Martha sat close to the fire. Ted Patterson and Jenny Mercer attended with their families. That morning, Wyatt noticed new yellow curtains at the windows. "You changed the curtains." "The old ones were terrible." "They were fine." Amelia gave him a look. Wyatt examined the little flowers woven into the cloth. "These are better." She understood he wasn't talking about curtains. Spring did not transform Silver Creek overnight. Hattie Dobbins still talked. Tom Briggs still wanted the east pasture. But other people began doing something harder. They began looking. Curtis Hale's horse went lame on a muddy road in April. Amelia stopped and walked the animal 2 miles beside him. Halfway to town, Curtis said, I signed that letter. I know. I shouldn't have. Amelia kept walking. I accept your apology. Curtis looked surprised. That's it? You said what you meant. We can start there. Later, Bill Mercer asked her to examine a frightened young horse 3 experienced men had failed to handle. Amelia didn't overpower it. She waited. 1 morning became 3, then 5. On the 5th morning, the horse finally let her place a hand against its neck. Bill watched from the stall door. My daughter-in-law was right about you. Amelia kept her hand still. He just needed somebody willing to take the time. Bill lowered his eyes. I signed that letter too. I know. I let other people do my thinking. Amelia looked at him. Then we'll start from here. By June, the mountains were green again. Eleanor's garden bloomed along the south wall, the old stones still holding their line beneath new growth. Amelia had placed 2 chairs on the porch. Wyatt used one every evening. They sat there after supper while Dela shifted contentedly in the barn and insects hummed along Silver Creek. You know what this place was before you came? Wyatt asked. A ranch. A functioning ranch, she smiled. That's romantic. Fences were straight, books balanced, animals fed. He looked across the pasture. But it wasn't alive. Amelia turned toward him. It is now. It isn't the curtains. I should hope not. Or the garden. His voice softened. It's you. For a while she said nothing. Then Amelia looked toward the road below the hill. I almost didn't stop that morning. Wyatt turned. I told myself you probably wanted to be left alone. That it wasn't my place. What changed your mind? From the barn came Dela's low, familiar call. Amelia smiled. Her. Wyatt listened. She was crying, Amelia said, and I couldn't hear an animal in distress and keep riding. She looked at him. That's not who I am. No, Wyatt said. It isn't. He reached between the chairs and took her hand. Thank you for stopping. Her fingers closed around his. Thank you for being worth stopping for. No one in Silver Creek heard them. No one needed to. The horses moved softly inside the barn. Wind passed through the summer grass. Eleanor's old stones remained beneath Amelia's new flowers, and 2 chairs stood on a porch where one man's loneliness had once been enough. That winter, Amelia had promised a dying cowboy, "Don't worry about your ranch, I'll take care of everything." By summer, she no longer had to. Neither did he. They had each other now. And that was what finally made the Callahan Ranch a home. Sometimes I think about how close Amelia came to riding past that hill. One more turn of the reins, one decision that it wasn't her concern, and Wyatt might have remained a lonely man behind a closed door. Amelia might have gone on believing that being useful was the closest she would ever come to being truly chosen. But she heard Dela crying. And she'd stopped. Maybe you've known a season like Wyatt's, when grief made solitude feel safer than hope. Or maybe you've been more like Amelia, always carrying what needed carrying, quietly wondering whether anyone would ever see the person beneath all that strength. Their story reminds us that love doesn't always arrive with grand promises. Sometimes it arrives carrying water through snow. Sometimes it sits beside a sickbed, sets a second coffee cup on the table, or simply keeps coming back. And sometimes a second chance begins when somebody finally has the courage to open a door they once thought should stay closed forever. If this story brought someone to mind, tell me in the comments, who was the person who stayed when you needed them most? And if you'd like to spend more evenings with stories of frontier love, healing, mystery, and people finding their way home when they least expect it, You're always welcome to subscribe and join us for the next one. Until then, remember Amelia's ride up that snowy hill. Sometimes the road home begins with choosing not to ride past.